The Tyson's Gift podcast was created to promote the normalization of metaphysical and spiritual topics, particularly the reality that we are all eternal souls having an earthly experience. Obviously, this will cover a wide berth of topics such as animal communication, mediumship, the paranormal, past life regression, energy healing, you name it. Brandon hopes to entertain his audience with fascinating discussions with experts, as well as everyday folks who have metaphysical experiences and knowledge to share. The intention is to help make esoteric topics fun, relatable, and credible for audiences of all backgrounds. And here is your host of the Tyson's Gift podcast, Brandon Wainwright.
Hello and welcome to the Tyson's Gift podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Wainwright on WLTK-DB Talk Radio. Tonight, we have a great show planned for you, but first, as always, Pepper Wainwright welcomes you. And if you've read the book Tyson's Gift, you know exactly why Pepper is so important to the show. I hope at some point you'll read it so you can find out. It's a very touching connection. So, all right, are you done? I think she's done. All right. Thank you. Yes. Okay. So tonight, some of you might have heard the first half of this show. It's featuring experiencer Will Washburn. Sorry, my eyes are going back and forth between me, and I'm still figuring this out. Between me and experiencer Will Washburn, who's also a lifelong friend. We met in 8th grade, and we've been close friends pretty much the whole time since then. So, but he's had a lot of paranormal experiences, everything from ghosts to actually what we're going to get into tonight, which is being haunted by a demonic figure known as he calls him the Top Hat Man, but he's also known as the Shadow Man. To some, I've heard that used. The more I talk to people about this, the more I find that these experiences are a lot more common than I ever realized. And I think probably more so than Will ever realized as well. So I'll bring him in here in just a minute, but I'm sure for some of you, this will be to your dismay and disgust, and others, you'll just be in delight to hear some good, dirty toilet humor from the last week. I'm only going to share this stuff if there's legitimate toilet humor to share. And this week, just happened to provide some really good stuff. First off, if anybody, I don't know how many of you tuning in right now, and by the way, feel free to put your comments in the comment section. I'll try to give you a shout out. I don't know how many of you tuned into the Facebook show cheese that I put out there every week. I do a little advertisement where there's a stalker that just every week he seems to want to know. He, she, I don't even know what gender they are or anything, but they keep wanting to know what the show's going to be about for the week. So I put that out on the Facebook announcement with the show each week. And this week, I actually saw the stalker before they saw me. And I had my niece, I was visiting my sister in Prescott, Arizona, and I had my niece try to jump out from behind a tree and scare the stalker. I don't know if it scared him, but it definitely probably got him to be a little bit afraid. But she blurted out a particular phrase, and I found that nobody seems to understand what the phrase was because she blurted out really loud and nasty, and the phrase was, "Is your sphincter getting a workout?" And so you probably understood me better than you understood her. So the phrase was, "Is your sphincter getting a workout?" And the backstory behind this was me being the demented uncle that I am. My nephew and niece are both in grade school. My niece is in kindergarten, and my nephew, I believe, is in 3rd grade. That shows you what a great uncle. I don't even know what grade he's in for sure. I'm 90% sure he's in 3rd grade. But they both are. I love to terrorize them with different, kid-friendly dirty jokes and things like that. And I kept using the phrase with them, "A sphincter says what?" from the original Wayne's World back and I think it came out in 91 or something like that. But it was great because their first reaction was, "What?" "A sphincter says what?" huh? So I kept using it, and that I just have always thought that word is just a funny word. Ever since I heard it for the first time, I thought sphincter is a funny word. So anyway, they were perplexed by this. I ended up going down to Sedona for the day. When I came back, I found that my brother-in-law had explained to them what a sphincter was. And my nephew says, "Hey, Uncle Brandon, I know what a sphincter is now." And I said, "Oh yeah, well, what is it?" And he gets this grimace on his face, and he starts pointing to his butt. For those of you who don't know what a sphincter is the round muscle that's in your anus that keeps shit from coming out. Okay. I'm getting this thumbs down from Will Washburn right now. He hates it when I do these things. So anyway, I had the phrase became, is your sphincter getting a workout? And the translation for that phrase, which I tried to teach to my nephew and niece and get them to say this to their parents anytime that they had a particular situation. The phrase means, in Brandon translation, do you need to take a shit? So, or my sphincter is getting the workout. I need to take a shit. So, okay, so there's one. Now that's the lead in. The other toilet humor that I experienced, which is actually funnier, I think, was much more organic. While I was in Sedona, I went down there to visit a friend and do a healing for him, and then I also went and got a healing done for myself with a particular medium psychic that I've had a number of sessions with over the years. She's really talented. She's fantastic. I can't mention her name right now because of the story I'm about to tell, but it was really an uplifting reading, and my mom actually came through. And those of you who I don't know how many of you are listening, but that know about this. But my mom passed away on the 21st of December, so it was it was very much a cathartic experience to have her come through and talk to me. And one of the first things she said to me during the session was that she was really proud of me. And my mom and I always knew she was proud of me, but my mom and I had a sometimes tumultuous relationship. There was always love there. And I, for the most part, had a pretty good relationship, but my mom struggled a lot with being happy. And so there was different things that went on. So when she said this, I started crying. It just happened. Like I kind of like a couple weeks ago when I was talking about Tyson, and all of a sudden I got hit with tears. It was the same type of thing. So this is the part that's funny. So the medium, being a sensitive person, decides to jump up out of her seat and get me a tissue. And she sits back down afterwards and she says, I had a little toot there when I got out of the seat. I was in such she said she was in such a trance that she was very relaxed. And so when she got out of the seat, she let a little air biscuit out. And I was like, oh, that's okay. That's okay. And, she was obviously really embarrassed. And the thing was, it smelled to heaven. It was a bad one. It was really bad. But I kept my composure and said, oh, don't worry about it. People that live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. I'm known for these types of things too. So it's all good. But it took all my willpower not to get up and open the door. And I didn't want to do that because then she'd be even more embarrassed. So anyway, there you have it. There's the toilet humor for the week. I can't guarantee that there will be any next week. It all depends on what happens during the next week. So I hope you enjoyed it. Ladies, we can now go into more sensitive territory. Before we bring our guest in, though, I'm going to have a couple of comments did come through. KM says, hi, Pepper. I think that might be Katrina. Hi, Katrina. Michelle Krantz says, cute pup. Thank you. I think so too. And Rachel Peterson says, I remember you saying something about a sphincter, at Delphi in one of our activities. I don't remember that, Rachel, but I'm sure I probably did. Okay. On that note, let's bring in our esteemed guest for this evening, Mr. Will Washburn. Hey, pal.
Hey, I can neither condone or endorse your toilet humor. It is.
I don't need your endorsement or your condonation.
It is somewhat embarrassing, but that's just you.
I don't care.
Being your friend has always been a little embarrassing,
Mm-hmm. Well,
But I love you, bro.
oh, I love you too. I won't use our nickname that we give each other on the air because some of you might think it's really bad. Let's go a little
I
too far.
think YouTube would censor you.
Say what?
I think YouTube would probably censor you.
Maybe, possibly. So, um, now that we're 10 minutes into the show, we have you back on so we can continue the conversation about your experiences with the Top Hat Man, right?
Yeah. Where would you like me to jump in? Do you want to lead in with anything?
So, well, I'll just, as I was saying, last time you were on the show, and by the way, go. I think it was the 15th of December. I want to say that was the date. It was in or around that day. So for those of you that are tuning in right now, if you want to go back in the archives, you can find the archives as far as the podcasts on WLTK-DB.com. Also on YouTube, but it's real easy. They're all on a list on WLTK-DB. Is Katrina sitting right there with you?
No.
Okay. Will was laughing at somebody off to the side, so I don't know who he was laughing at. But anyway, if you want to get the rundown on what we discussed last time, we got a lot into different experiences with entity. Well, shouldn't say entities because that has a bad connotation, but different experiences with spirits, ghosts, things like that he had throughout his life. Some of which happened to both of us because we were roommates at the time. And also one of them occurred at my house when he was visiting. So those are different things that we talked about last time, but it all ultimately led into the coup de grace, which is his experiences with the Top Hat Man. So why don't you back up just a little bit? Don't go into the whole thing,
Sure.
but give a little bit of a rundown about, where you were at the time, and, you can briefly discuss your religious background that you had at the time, your
Sure.
age and all that stuff, and just lead in and go for it.
Yeah, at about 6 years old, I was being kind of groomed for the priesthood. My family had a real military background, and even at that age, we had bounced around a lot. And my parents were sampling different churches. They settled into one that subscribed very heavily to the concept of possession, and in a short amount of time, this church was very much a second home to me. And before I could really learn to read in school, I was pretty heavily indoctrinated into the priesthood, and anything that was not associated with the church was kind of removed from our homes and lives, to include radio, television. If it didn't come from the Christian bookstore, it was not allowed in our house by that age.
So the magazines that you found near the window at the local liquor store wouldn't have passed muster.
Oh gosh, I can remember let's call it the purge, the day that several elders from the church came to the house, and there was a very ceremonial gathering of books and records. And I was like a huge Spider-Man comic book fan. Loved Spider-Man.
Still are, by the way, right? Still
But
are.
I remember having to kind of place those into a pile with the evil that was Elvis Presley's "You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog." If it did not come from the church, it was not allowed in the home. And at the time, my parents, they had a lot of books to burn, a lot of which were true nonfiction murder mysteries. There seems to be kind of a fascination with a lot of these serial killer documentaries that happens today, and I was recently talking to somebody about that. And but even back then, there was my mother was intensely fascinated with nonfiction murder mysteries. There weren't a whole lot of serial killers that had kind of come to light in the late 70s when this all went down. But again, I was about 6 years old. It's like 1979, 1980, and my life is the church. As a young boy, spending 4 days every day after school, all day Sunday, cleaning and preparing the church on Saturday. This was my life.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, when you when they basically recruited you and saw this ability that you had, do you think that ability was biblical theological knowledge, or do you think it was more that they saw a light in you?
No, I really, over the years, I've kind of wondered what it was that they saw. And I've been to, I have myself sampled from different religions, and I studied philosophy of religion in college for a little while. And I've had some odd experiences just walking into a church for the first time with a friend who was going to try this or goes to this church, and been approached by a priest who says something derivative of, you have the gift, we need to talk. And I kind of am taken back what that gift is. I have no idea. I am very fascinated by some of the contradictions in religion. I'm very fascinated by the concept of religion, and I can talk and debate both sides endlessly with just total fascination by the content. Whether I'll take one side or the other probably depends on which day it is. But at a really young age, that was I was missing some role models. There was not a whole lot of continuity of family because we moved a lot, and I can remember going to a friend's church and asking their local pastor to give me his autograph because I revered these people. I thought they were cooler than ice. Like, I thought they were really celebrities in my world. And when you don't have TV and you don't have radio, and you do, your week kind of centers around what this guy says on stage. I can look back now and see how that became that in my mind. But I idolized people in the church.
I think I've never experienced that. I grew up more agnostic, but I've heard that is very common, that people they see their pastors as bigger than life, like celebrity status, only on a very small local level. And oftentimes, well, I shouldn't say oftentimes, but it isn't uncommon for pastors to fall into, get to lose their way.
Yeah.
Because their egos get in the way, and they end up off track because of that celebrity status.
I think there's too many stories to count of people who kind of gave into the vanity of that position, or the perks of being deferred to. I can't even imagine what it would be like to walk through my day and have people assume that everything I say is correct or right.
I think a good sign, if you have a pastor that seems to see that as a perk,
yeah,
I think that would be maybe a blessing, in the sense that it's an honor to give people guidance, to be in a position where you are trusted, but an honor as in I hold this trust sacred, and I'm going to do everything I can to steer people toward the light. But if you have a pastor that seems to get off on that,
sure,
that's probably not a good sign.
I love to watch the YouTube videos of the pastors who do seem to get off on that, because it's wildly, it blows my mind. But I had actually an amazing mentor. His name was Pastor Fells, and his approach was one of humility. And he had, I have been around, at this point, I have been baptized 6 different times. I've been anointed with the priesthood twice. I am the furthest thing from a priestly individual.
No shit.
No shit. But my exposure to all these things, it gave me a good knowledge base about what the church is trying to communicate. And I have used that knowledge sometimes to kind of game the system, where I didn't really believe in what was being said, but I could probably out-debate somebody who had a strong belief but not a very strong knowledge base. And a lot of that really came from this experience. So I'm 6 years old. I'm kind of being groomed for priesthood. It was my life, and we lived in this condominium in this community in Salinas, California, that was pretty rough, and the complex was called Acosta Plaza, but it was affectionately known as Felony Flats. If you've seen Cops in Monterey and Salinas, guarantee you've seen my old house.
Hmm.
That place was bad. A lot of gang activity, a lot of territorial gangs.
A lot of negative energy.
A lot of negative energy, and a lot of bad things have been happening there since probably the early 70s. It used to be a nice place, but somewhere in the mid 70s, there was an influx of gang activity in the Salinas area, and this literally was the nexus of that in my backyard. And a lot of really what I would consider now to be evil people. But what are you going to?
Well, and you know, going back to what you said about the different church leaders periodically immediately seeing you and seeing something in you without even talking to you, they see a certain light. You know, that's one of the things I think people that are deeply spiritual can pick up on energy.
Sure.
And so you clearly had a light about you, and you know, but yet you're a little kid with no knowledge as
I
far
was
as of the evils of the world. You don't know how to protect yourself. You're young and innocent and vulnerable.
Well,
And
like I said, this church was heavily invested in the concept of possession, and believed, similar to what Scientologists believe, that we are created in a divine image, and if there's bad things within you, it's not you, it's a bad thing within you. And for a Baptist church, they were uncommonly invested in exorcism. And I had witnessed a few exorcisms already at 6 years old, with the elders kind of standing in the background, and I accepted these things as fact, natural, normal. And when a husband had a temper problem or a problem within the marriage, it wasn't his problem. It was he was possessed, and the church would go over and do an exorcism, and strange voices and rage would come out of an individual. And I believed you're 6 years old. What else are you going to do? But I was also very conscious, and I don't know where this consciousness came from, that I would be, as a young innocent person so close to the church, that I not only made for a target but also a beautiful trophy for things that intended to corrupt. Call them entity, call them malevolent, call them whatever you want to call them. As a little kid, I was conscious to steer clear of evil in any form, because corrupting a 6-year-old little priesthood, student, was so much more rewarding to evil than corrupting a 49-year-old jaded dude who doesn't really care.
well, the other thing is, and this is a factor that has recently been something that I've been grappling with a little bit. We've talked about it off the air, but you know, if you have had a lot of potential to spread light in the world and to bring healing to people and bring that love and light to the world, and obviously you did, because all these spiritual leaders could see that in you. Well, so could dark entities.
Right. Yeah.
And what better way to stop a light from shining before it even gets started than to go after a young child like that that's on his way.
So it had been a fairly normal, apart from the cult-like upbringing. I was into Star Wars, and I was into playing with action figures and riding my BMX bike and doing all that kind of stuff that we did.
As most little boys were back in the late 70s, early 80s.
Right. It was all about the BMX. And one night, while I was awake in my room, a shadowy figure stood in the doorway, and he didn't leave for several years. Um, he was large. He was wide enough at the shoulder that his shoulders occupied the entire width of the doorway. He was tall, that his head had to be cocked to the side like this because the top of the door frame hit his head. He blocked the light out in most ways, but I could see that his face was very much like a skeleton, like a skull. Occasionally, I could see some red in his eyes, but for the most part, it was an obscured shadow. And there's a lot of specific descriptions of the Hat Man or these shadow people. But one thing that I've always been acutely aware of is I saw an amazing amount of detail. I could tell you the stitching on his coat. And he wore a Western style tuxedo that was very high cut around the waist, but it had tails. He had his hat was reminiscent of a top hat, but a short top hat, almost like a top hat from the late 1800s in America, like almost a beaver pelt hat. And I could see his face. He was not obscured entirely by the shadows, but he was all black, and the shadow kind of seemed to dance around him a little bit, but I could see his mouth move when he talked to me. And he was a skull, and I referred to him as the Phantom Toll Booth because there's this giant imposing figure, and very phantom-like, but to pass, you had to pay a price. And I don't know how I came up with that. But even at 6, that was what I called him. I had never heard of shadow people. I had never heard of the Top Hat Man. I had never heard of any of this stuff. This is 30 damn years before the internet came around. And if you started telling these stories, even at 6, I knew people are going to think you're insane if you start talking about this. But one night he arrived.
Now, for the skeptics out there, you sure it wasn't like a bad dream?
I've thought, there were points in my life where I've gone back and I've questioned, was it a nightmare? Am I projecting some shadowy figure to cover up something horrible that happened to me, like an incest or a molestation thing? You have to run the gambit in your mind of exhausting all rational explanation first. And I think that's a very objective and positive approach to take. Can I reasonably explain this away? And initially, the first thing that I was conscious of when you were a kid was, I'm not asleep. In fact, I'm terrified to go to sleep, because to take my eyes off him, I was afraid that the moment I stopped that visual connection, he was just going to march right through that doorway and end me in some way, shape, or form. I did not sleep. And back in the day, you used to be able to go to church and get these little tiny pocket-sized New Testament Bibles that were about this big. And without looking too obvious or trying to raise suspicion, every Sunday I would be taking another Bible and putting it in my pocket, to the point that by the time that I was about 7, if you had lifted up my mattress, it was 2 deep, stacked, head to toe, full width. I was laying on Bibles. I was consciously afraid of something that didn't just happen once or twice or 20 times.
I don't think you ever told me that part about the Bibles. Maybe you did at some point. I don't remember it though.
This is something that happened hundreds of times. And and he spoke, and he was articulate, and we had conversations, and he said things that I would remember the words, but I can remember being like 12 years old and being like, oh, that's what that means. Because you hear something as a kid, and you might remember almost like the musicality of the phrase, but you don't really understand the dialogue. And I would look back at that and I would say there were things that were said that a child could not understand. And then there were things said in a way that only a child could understand. But at the core of it, he was, he let me know that in no uncertain terms that I'm not allowed to, that if I shared the experience, people are going to think I'm crazy. That if I talk about it, it empowers him, almost like a fear that you pass on to other people. Now this thing within him grows even bigger, and that makes my life worse. So the more I try to share the experience, the more danger that I'd be in, and it was immediately very isolating. And there was a component of it where I could see his mouth move and I could hear him, but I almost was aware that I'm hearing him in my head, not with my ears. But I was very aware that he can hear what's going on in my head, and I would do this meditative thing to try and clear my mind, because the game that he was playing was to take something in my mind that was very benign, something, you know, an experience or an interaction that I had with somebody or a person that I knew, and twist this image of them into something very horrific and very just scary. And as a kid, it became so isolating. One of the things that he would say to me on a regular basis, he would say, "Shh, I will be in the eyes and mouths of everyone you see." And so I was scared to death to look in people's eyes or to talk to them. And I went from being this very outgoing, like, bouncy kid. You look at my report cards from the time, overnight, it goes from this kid loves to do all these things to Will is the shyest person in the world. Will is the shyest student we've ever had. And we moved schools from time to time. I think I moved schools probably in the 3 years that I had to deal with this. I moved schools twice, but, you know, grade to grade, every little report card came out, had a comment about he doesn't talk. We think, you know, there's something wrong with him. Clearly he's smart enough, but he's mute, just on full time.
Did you ever have any experiences where, as you said, you through the eyes and words of these people, of people that he could come through? Did you ever experience anything like that?
What was happening on the periphery that I couldn't really connect to, and hindsight is 2020, but I had a sister who was 3 years older than I was, and my mother and father were still married at the time. And my sister was, what I didn't realize until years later was that everybody was being tormented in their own way while we were in this house.
Well, the other question I had is you said that you changed schools a couple times during the 3 years. Did you also change living quarters?
We did. I moved, and he followed me into the next house.
Okay. Well, I'll get to that.
Yeah. No, so it was the things that I noticed immediately were the withdrawal, and, you know, put your own conclusion on it. But we went from being a fairly tight-knit unit of three, my mom, my sister, and I. My dad was kind of always absent. He was a military guy himself, so up early, home late. But tempers escalated to 10. My sister and I fought violently. My mother all of a sudden became this very, very withdrawn person whose temper was so explosive. I can remember her ripping a bathroom door off the hinges by handle, just grabbing it and yanking it and throwing it across the whole door across the room through like a sliding glass window. Like tempers well beyond. I can remember my mom breaking every single dish we owned one day and just screaming at the top of her lungs. It was scary. It was scary to be in the house with the other people in the house. And what I didn't realize until it took years for everybody to kind of unpack their circumstances there. But my dad had his share of experiences. There was a room that kind of seemed to be the heart of the house, and he had been pushed down to the ground several times trying to walk out of the room. My mother had this enraging temper, but she had this persistent nightmare that she was being possessed and trying to kill her children. In this nightmare, she successfully chops off my sister's head with a meat cleaver, and this possessing force leaves her body. And the reality in the dream, the reality of what she's done sets in, and she goes crazy and tries to sew my sister's head back on with a needle and thread. And this nightmare would not leave her. We had my mom's sister lived with us for a little while. Her husband, my uncle, was stationed in the Philippines with the Navy. And my aunt was supposed to stay with us for the duration of his deployment, which was 2 years. She stayed for 3 months in that house. And she left because she later would tell me that she heard voices that were whispering to her all night long. And the one thing that she could hear them saying was, "Kill the children." She left, and in a weird way, everyone who was so close with the church went in very different directions, including the aunt. My parents were very, very active in the church right up until that point, and I was obviously very active in the church right up until that point. But it persisted, and nobody talked about it, which I think the isolation and the fear combined are just gas and fire.
Yeah.
The feeling of loneliness when you are afraid that no one can help is,
And afraid that you're going to be seen as a crazy person.
yes.
Kind
And
of
I
like
was,
the child that, that's being preyed upon,
sure.
and yeah, that's told,
So
if you go to help, I'm just going to make it worse.
I became like the scaredest person on earth. And if you asked me to take out the trash after dark, I was sure that the devil himself was waiting behind that trash can to take my soul. Um, I was, I was, I became so paranoid about every little thing, and the manipulations of perception or memory or thought really made me question: Am I losing my mind? Uh,
Yeah.
but you're a little kid, and so at about 8 years old,
Well,
we had
that's, I mean, not only is it outlandish, but the stress and the disorientation that was a result of all that. I mean,
all
if you
little
go,
kid, yeah, all
I
little
mean,
kid.
how are you supposed to be grounded? How are you supposed to have any sense of security, or
You're
and
grounded.
not just in the stuff
Yeah,
that you're dealing with there, but everyday life? Everything must have
yeah.
been obscured and
Well,
all.
and for that matter, I went to a Christian school. I was immersed in the faith in every way. But it all kind of came to a head. That it had been about 3 years, and we had moved houses, and it was not uncommon for me to see him around the corner in the daytime outside. I would see a shadow, and I would look, and it would be gone. But if I was just looking at you and just let my peripheral gaze,
Yeah.
he's standing right there, just standing right there.
Hey,
And
just so you know, we're going to come up on it. We're going to do a little sponsor break here in a minute. Just
all good, all good.
and also, Aaron Smith says, "I would have checked myself in somewhere out of fear."
Yeah, the
Although, the thing about that though is that, we're talking about the late '70s, right? I mean, in
yep.
today's world, paranormal activity and phenomenon, I think, is far more accepted.
Well, and
But maybe you yourself would have thought, Aaron, maybe you yourself would have thought you're losing it. You check yourself.
there was a point
What do you
where
know?
you have to reconcile: am I crazy or not? And you're just a little kid, and
Yeah.
imagination run wild. But even as a little kid, I was conscious that if I tell this story, they're gonna think I'm crazy. Um, and over the years, that would be significant to me, to understand the difference between what people would assume to be crazy and what I was experiencing. And that line was very important to me. But in the end, it 3 years with this, and it escalated and it got worse. And I was conscious that it fed on the fear of what was going on. But I was also very conscious that it was not going to go away. There was one thing that he was very good at taunting and making fun of and belittling. And
let's stop right there.
Okay, take a break.
We'll come back to the taunting. So we're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back with you.
The Body Code is a revolutionary method of energetic healing developed by Dr. Bradley Nelson, which allows us to quickly and easily identify specific imbalances that seem to underline chronic ill health, acute and chronic pain, and discomfort, dysfunction, and stress. Ellie energetically connects with the subconscious of the client. Psychic medium Ellie Weisensell is a medical intuitive and energy healer, and a certified body code practitioner. She identifies and clears energetic imbalances within the body and energy field. Contact Ellie at the website below, and Ellie can work remotely from a distance, by phone, online, video chat. There's no need to travel to an office. Remember, the Body Code is safe for humans and animals. Contact Ellie today.
And we're back on the Tyson's Gift podcast on WLTK-DB Talk Radio. I've got guest Will Washburn here. We're discussing his experiences with the Top Hat Man. Also, Erin Smith said in the mother case, she's the one that was talking about checking herself in, so she empathizes with your mom's position. So you're saying that he taunted you?
He was very good at taunting me for being weak, for being unable to confront him. And over the years, one of the things that he would repeat would be, just get up and walk. Just, if you don't think I'm here, just walk right through me. If this isn't real, just walk right through me. But it was designed to confront my weakness. So a couple interesting things happened. I'll try and accelerate the pace of the story a little bit.
To confront it or to exploit it?
I'll get to that. I'll get to that, because I think that was so significant, what he was saying, in the way that I dealt with things. But we had exhausted our time in this condominium, and my mom had taken a job as a part-time real estate office, and she was showing houses. And it just so happened that our neighbor next door was selling their house at the same time that we were moving. And my mom's agency office had picked up this listing. So she was going to go show this house. And, if you remember from the first show, there was definitely a place where this thing seemed to emerge from. We had a large living room on the second floor of this condominium that my aunt had problems in, that everybody had. This is the room that my dad got pushed down in a few times. This is the room where I visually would see the things come from this room. So my mom does this real estate showing, and she has this horrific surprise when she goes into the neighbor's house, and it's kind of a mirrored floor plan where, they kind of opposite, but their big living room matched our big living room. And our neighbors, in Felony Flats, were problematic. The police were always there, and the problem seemed to center around, they had a teenage son who was like 17, 18. He was always getting arrested. He was always causing problems for the family, and always violence, always with the violent, not like the breaking and entering, but he holds a knife to somebody's throat, or he cuts his mom really bad. The kid was bad news. But without telling me too much, my mom called this pastor over that I really admired, Pastor Fells, and again, the church is really into exorcisms, and she was, I could see her shaking, but she wanted some help. And the priest came over, and she said, I just need you to see what's going on in this house and help us explain it. And what I didn't know at the time, I didn't know that my mom was having these nightmares, and I didn't know that everybody else was struggling the way that they were. But my mom opens up the door, and I watched this elderly man collapse. The door open, and it was like right out of like Amityville Horror. Like the door opened, and this priest in his black with the white collar fell to his hands and knees, and he was dripping sweat, and he, very theatrically said, we have to exorcise this house right now. And actually what we found was in that room that backed up against our living room. This teenage kid had pulled the sheetrock, had pulled the insulation out, had pulled, there's kind of a firewall between buildings, when you build condos. He had chipped away that, and the only thing separating his space from our space was like a 5/8 inch piece of sheetrock, and he had drawn this huge pentagram on the wall there, and he clearly had a shrine that on the wall that basically was the back of our living room. And we were going to move anyway, but this was too horrific to process for my church conservative family at the time. And I saw it. My mom saw it. The priest saw it. He did an exorcism. I could not process it, because I immediately felt like this is some type of window that these things are coming through, and this is the source. So let's GTFO. And maybe a couple weeks later, we had moved, and it took a couple weeks to catch up to me. But in the new house, all of a sudden, the new house was a little bit bigger, and instead of carpeted floors everywhere, it was wood floors. And wood floors just kind of have that echoey sound to them. And all of a sudden, I could hear the Hat Man's footsteps coming to the door. And there was this like wave of fear, like you hear the steps coming, and he would just stand there. And the level of aggression was ramped up. Like I couldn't explain why, but it was like all of a sudden everything was way scarier. And there came a point where I was not really sleeping. I would stay up at night with markers, and I would draw all over myself, and I, like draw like what would now be like ink tattoos, anything to stay awake. And wake up, and I'd be like covered in like green Sharpie or some dumb shit like that. But I had this walking hallucination, and that's what I would call them as I was a kid, because I was wide awake, and I know this isn't real. I know it can't be real, but I'm seeing this horrific scene unfold in my yard where these little kids are being kind of transformed and eaten alive by these wolf-like creatures. And the sound of these children in pain penetrated me in a way that the experience had never really affected me before. And I can remember thinking, this is that moment, like you just got to do it. And I had a stuffed animal. It was a lamb, like a sheep. I grabbed my sheep, and I closed my eyes, and I walked through that doorway where he was standing, and went to my parents' room. And now in 3 years of him standing there, I never once went to anybody's room. I never once asked for help. I could not get up to ask for help.
Would
That was,
you say that you reached a breaking point where you just couldn't take it anymore, and it was either
um,
I'd rather die than to have to deal with this anymore?
no, I was so scared of being in that room anymore because there was horror on the outside of the window, there's horror in the doorway, and I just had to get out. Um, and I walked into my parents' room, and I had never before walked into their room and tried to wake them up and said, "Hey, I'm having a bad dream." Never happened because I couldn't get through the damn doorway. At probably 8 years old, I walked into the room and I just stood at the foot of their bed and stared at them, which must have been creepy as hell. But didn't want to wake anybody up because, again, my parents were pretty damn temperamental. Um, and that confrontation seemed to dispel it. But I did a very understandable thing at that point, and I immediately was resentful towards the church and very resentful towards God. Here I am, this kid who's been, my whole life was the priesthood, and I was conscious that, God could have helped me and God could have saved me, but you left me there. You left me there to hang and to hurt and fear. And
Did you ever pray for help?
oh, I can recite entire, not verses, chapters to you, um, to this day, because it was over and over again like a meditative mantra. Um, and I would talk to the priests about which chapters would help the most. But I very much was angry at the enabler, and I saw that God, as a divine spirit, had allowed this shit to happen to me. And I immediately took all the fear and converted it into resentment of the church. This is how you treat the people who are closest to you. This is how you take care of the ones who, live this kind of message. Boy, was I an angry little, I was angry. And angry at the church, and very knowledgeable, like uncommonly knowledgeable. We still went to church. We still moved a lot. I never lost like a Bible study award or a, Sunday school award. I knew that stuff inside out and backwards.
Courtney Lopez says, "How did I miss the live notification?" Sorry, Courtney, I don't know, but I'm glad you're here, and it'll be archived, so you'll be able to, if you want to go back and watch the beginning. Thanks for being here again. We appreciate it.
But it took a long time, to really unpack everything with the family, and then you start to hear that everybody had their own experiences, and I really became more of a student of religion to really understand the concepts of faith and the concepts of a divine being. Um, for those of you out there who are looking to bake your noodle, how can something be all good and all powerful? Because if it's all powerful, it would prevent the bad things from happening. And if it's all good, it must not be all powerful. Otherwise, it would prevent the bad things from happening. And I'm not talking about the bad things that happen to me. I'm, talking about starving kids and disease and pandemic stuff that innocent people die all the time. And that I had a very philosophical problem trying to reconcile how can something be all good and all powerful when the world clearly shows you a different picture. But over the years, I dove headfirst into those questions, and I used to think that the experience made me spiritually stronger and more capable of dealing with negativity. But maybe when I was about 20, I started to wonder, did I give in to the wishes of an evil entity? And in the if you follow some of the cult thinking, you have to invite evil into you on some capacity.
Well, I hate to interject, but in my opinion, knowing you, I mean, and
Sure.
and also knowing that situation, you didn't invite that
I
entity.
didn't, but you know what I did? I did what he asked me to do. I eventually walked through the door. And part of me was very conscious that was that the trick? Was that the moment that I occupied the same spiritual space as this evil entity? And was that the whole goal of it all, was to get me so scared that I got up and walked out of the bed, and somehow I backpacked this bastard with me because I was angry. And man, was I resentful toward the church. And man, did I never wanted to give in to faith again. And I had a very unique knack of taking the knowledge that I had learned from the church and in debate and conversation with other people, using that knowledge in a seemingly positive way to get them to question their own religious beliefs. And when I was really conscious of that, I started to think, shit, did I do what he said by walking through that doorway and somehow attach this thing to me? It took me a long time to really own my stuff and say, no, you were just a scared kid who is now resentful at the enabler. And I did find my way back to faith, and I did find my way back to a relationship with God. And I'm not really convinced that there's a whole lot of I don't really draw a whole lot of strength from the community of religion, but I do draw some strength from my personal relationship and my personal beliefs. And in any relationship, it is a very uniquely one-on-one thing that is different for you than it is for me. And I can accept that without saying we should all get together and follow the same set of rules. I do believe it is a relationship, but I also do believe that there's more that I don't know than I ever will know. And
Absolutely.
and I do look at some of that Old Testament stuff, wrath, fire, fury, vengeance, revenge, selfishness. Like if you look at what the church preaches today versus what is written in the text, God is vengeful, and he destroys entire cities in genocide type fashion if they do not revere his name. This is not the teddy bear loving thing that I came to be, told it was. But I don't believe in any of that as much as I believe that there is a beautifully divine God that I have a very personal relationship with. But it took some shedding of some of that structure to get there. But years later, the internet came out, and
let me real quick. Let me just do a shout out to a couple folks. Rachel says, "I can understand the resentment."
Yeah.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, me too. Courtney says she'll listen to the beginning of the show when she's doing the dishes tomorrow. Good idea. It's always good to multitask in their busy lives. Everything is learned, she says, in will and choice. Go continue, my good friend.
You just totally ruined my train of thought. No, when the internet really started to explode, one of the first things that I was looking for was, has anybody else seen this dude in a hat? I can remember 1996 sitting in my first office with my first internet connected computer. I was big time. The office was a converted supply closet, and I was not big time, but it was my office. And it was my computer, and it was connected to the internet.
Do you have a red stapler?
I do. Hell yeah, I do.
Did you have one back then?
No, but Swingline doesn't even make a red stapler. That was specific for that movie.
Oh.
And now they make.
Did you consider blowing up the building when they took your stapler?
Touch my stapler, it's over. But
if anybody's wondering what we're talking about, that's a reference to the amazing film Office Space.
Yeah. So one of the first things that I was looking for on the internet, other than Spider-Man stuff, was anybody seen this guy in the hat? And at a time when there was very little content on the internet, some of you people probably don't remember it at all. There were thousands of people who had this story to tell. And for the first time in my entire life, I was probably 25, 26. And there was some validation that I knew I wasn't crazy, but now, holy crap, I wasn't imagining it. Like it was like I can't explain the validation that came with yes, this is something to be afraid of. Yes, this is something that's real. And 1,000 other people had this experience. And you know what? I'm so glad about that. It's a very weird thing to think like, I'm happy that everybody else is tortured too, because that means conclusively that I'm not bananas, which I believed myself. But when you believe something in isolation and it's just you who believes it, it's not as
Yeah.
powerful.
Well, especially when you're a little kid.
Yeah, yeah. So it in a very full circle way, you know, the more and I don't. There's a couple of great movies. There's one called Shadow People. There's a Hat Man documentary on Amazon right now that I'm not watching. I do believe that some of the things that you explore empower some of those portals, windows, things to open up into your life. And I'm a big boy, and I'm not afraid to sleep in the dark anymore. Um, but I'm also not watching a lot of that stuff because I know I would be. I think there's all rationale and all reason that I can plug into it. I'm still such a believer that there are things just around the corner that are pretty heavy to confront. And I did see some shadow people for the next couple of years, but they kind of seemed to dissipate by the time that I was about 12 years old. Nothing ever malevolent, nothing ever interactive, nothing ever.
They weren't, so not top hat men, but
Nope.
so
Nope.
yeah. So shadow people. I mean,
Shadow people. I
I've seen,
honestly want to say this. Like, I kind of think that might be in my imagination. I kind of think that might be a trick of the eye sometimes for a
no,
lot of
I've
people.
seen shadow people, and
I think a lot of people have, but I'm not so convinced of their existence as much as I'll be completely scientifically objective and say I can come up with some good reasons for that. Um, but
no, but you're I had an experience at my parents' house when I was in high school, and I was looking right at it. I had time to check myself and say, what am I seeing in this thing moving? And my stepmom Carla saw the same, but actually could see
yeah,
clothing details. No, this is very real, but shadow people, that could be a lot of things. It could be a ghost. It could be somebody from a different plane of consciousness that's overlap. There's all, we don't know for sure what that is, but they're certainly not all malevolent.
no,
Um,
but this was, and
yeah.
I'll close out with just this. I've over the years. This story to me has become so integral to my human development, my character development, because this was the moment that I confronted and overcame fears, but then began to question whether or not my intentions were my own, or where my resentment or anger came from, um, and I have met no less than three people who, just in conversation, one of the first conversations that we have is somewhat fear based, and they will, without me bringing it up, they will either bring up that they've seen this figure, um, or actually in these three cases, said that they wanted me to stay at their house because when I'm in their house, they don't see this figure. And and even I had a buddy in the Army who wanted me to move rooms, because he said the only time that he doesn't see this thing in the background is when I was in his room. So for whatever that is, it's enough to make you wonder and make you think what that means. But it is, I do feel somewhat empowered for confronting it, but I also feel somewhat belittled knowing that it's probably not the strength that comes from within me, but probably from somewhere else that I'm able to
Well,
to
I
catch.
I personally think that strength, it comes from God. It comes from the light, and if you choose to pull that light in, and say, "Eat it. You're not getting over on me. I got the light." And you chant and you tap into that. Ultimately, it doesn't have power when you call in the light. But that's something that is, I think it's difficult for, especially for a young child that
Yeah.
doesn't understand that, that's petrified. It's also something that you have to have faith in and understand. And that isn't something that a being like this, they're not going to go after somebody like that. They're going to go after somebody that's going to cave and be
Yeah.
vulnerable and afraid and give them that power. Whereas I've actually been under attack before, in a state where I was in between. I wasn't dreaming, but I wasn't awake, but I was conscious. I was conscious
Hmm.
of not. I was conscious that I was asleep, and aware, but yet I wasn't dreaming and I wasn't awake. Weird state. I haven't been able to recall that, very many times, but there was one time where that happened, and I felt this hostile presence,
Hmm.
and I told that thing, beat it. This is early in my spiritual development too, but I said, beat it. I got the white light.
Well, I think so
And
much of
this thing went off. It screamed like it was like something out of a horror film. But it left. It was
well,
ticked, but I,
I look at some people are afraid of spiders or heights or um, whatever it is that fear, where that fear comes from. I think that the reaction you give to anything amplifies. If
I
if
agree with
if
you.
you put your arm out there and I put a little spider on your arm, and I just
Mm.
stared you in the eyes and I said, "Sit still and don't move," versus if you give into that reaction, you have a whole body reaction once you give into it,
Mhm.
versus the mental reaction of just sit still and let that thing crawl on my arm.
Yeah.
Uh, you're the I think that giving into that fear empowers that fear, whatever it is.
Well,
Uh,
when you have a malevolent presence,
but I also think about things like bees and spiders and snakes in the same capacity, because you're looking at if you were to look at a shadowy entity or something like that that's physically not even really present, or you're looking at a bee. How much bigger are you than a bee or a spider? How
yeah,
many hundreds of thousands of times larger are you than this thing that you're afraid of? And there is something that's very calming to me that if if you can just center on, I'm the thing that they're afraid of. If I can just capture that energy instead of feeling the fear of having a spider crawl across your face, well, he's probably, if he was conscious of where he was, he would be way more scared that you're going to eat him than he is that you are that he's going to bite you.
sure.
Um, and I look at those situations now in that same frame of, I am the thing that they are afraid of, and this is just a little, this is just a little annoyance that's either screaming for attention or blindly walking through and trying to defend itself. But
Yeah.
that's I'll
Well,
throw that out there, and I'll say it was a great time, great story, and
yeah, it is. I'm sure everybody here was enthralled with it. I've heard it. I don't know,
a few times.
at least 50 to 100 times, and you know what? I actually think the Bible thing. I remember you talking about getting those little Bibles. I just forgot about the that you had, like, where you literally had.
The hardest thing was when we moved those houses, I had to hide about 100 Bibles. Um, and I can remember throwing away toys and throwing away clothes so that I could, like a drug smuggler, putting Bibles in with clothes on top of the box. They'll
And,
never know.
and the sad thing is that if they had found it, it might have been, they might have been like, oh my gosh,
Right. It might have been, what's going
it might have helped. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Rachel says, I'm so sorry you had to go through all this, Will, but I now hear what you learned from it to overcome your fears, and I'm sure so much more. Yeah, Rachel's a very tender soul. She says also, talking about that state I was in when I was sleeping. She says that's the vibrational state, Brandon. Yeah, yeah, and yeah. I've experienced that a couple different times in different varying sensations and things like that. But yeah, that's something I believe. So you can call it that. I just want to comment on. I'm sure for some people listening to this, thinking about these dark forces and the unknown and the possibility that it could prey upon you. Um, I think it's a perspective thing in that if you think about it, uh, if you're somebody that's a light worker, for example, you're somebody that's trying to heal and call light, love and light in, and that's your intention. That's the energy that you're approaching life with. That's the energy that you're approaching your situations and relationships with. Has a vibrational frequency to it, and like attracts like. So if you have this light, you're going to draw the same. If your intention is dark, you're going to be more likely to draw in dark energy. I don't think that you were. I think that had a lot more to do with that satanic neighbor that you had. That's just my opinion. I'm no expert, but certainly you ended up in a situation, and you were just a young, vulnerable kid that became a victim. But for people listening to the show right now that might be weirded out by this, realize that you have more power than maybe you have considered. You have the option, you have the power to call in God's light. And these type of evil entities, they're not comfortable in God's light. God's light will overpower them every time. But that's something that you have to understand and be willing to turn to.
Well, I think,
And
I want to weigh in on that a little bit, and I was going to keep my mouth shut and let you wrap it up because I know we're over time. But I do think that opening yourself up spiritually, or vibrating on one level, there is an opposite attraction, just like a magnet. There is a window that you're opening that other things can crawl through. And I know one of your listeners right now had lived an extremely devout life and had a very similar, like, horrific experience with an entity that was confrontational and even mimicked someone that was close to her, in physical presence. Um, and I do think that it is very important to be centered on your internal strength, your independent strength,
mhm.
and your surety of self that, you are capable, without drawing in anything else. But I do think that, you hear a lot more of these stories when you go to church. You hear a lot more of these stories when you go to temple. Um, the opening of the spiritual windows does allow for some creepy things to come in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I think it comes in anywhere. I think let me get to that, but I think uh, when it comes to spiritual practice, whether it be religious, spiritualist practice, whatever you want to call it, if you're approaching it from a place of fear, if you're
Yeah,
approaching it as an, oh, please protect me, God, that's a place of fear. That's not a place of empowerment and seeing yourself as being able to work within God's light. And that is going to draw in entities that want to
yeah.
capitalize on that fear. And so
I
it's not,
admire your confidence. I'm not so assured.
huh?
I admire your confidence, but I'm not
Well,
so assured personally.
the- well, and so what I'm saying is that, I mean, there's lots of time. Just because dark things are drawn to you doesn't mean you yourself are dark.
Right,
I'm not saying that
right.
at all. But I think there's different. There ultimately the bottom line is the light overpowers all. That I am sure.
Link to that. Yeah.
And so that's something that to keep in mind. And think of one one intuitive one time explained it to me in a way that just for me it just resonated. It was so poignant to me. um trying to understand planes of consciousness, spiritual planes, the astral plane, the emotional plane, you name it. There's different realms of consciousness, and when we think of the physical world, the physical plane, we think of that as like, oh, this is Earth, this is physical, this isn't a spiritual plane, but actually it is. It's a spiritual plane of consciousness, just like the astral plane is. And it's on a different frequency. It's on a more physical frequency, a slower frequency, but it is still a spiritual plane of consciousness. And on this plane there's good. There's lots of good, but there's also lots of evil. Just watch the news sometime. And so, you have a choice in what you draw to you and what you choose to engage in. And so that's all that in itself. I think if you think about that, you have that empowerment. You have the ability to draw to you what you choose to. I'm not saying you're not going to encounter evil if you're good, because any good person has encountered dark people as well, but you don't have to make that a part of you. You don't have to join it and engage in it and do its bidding. If you're a good person that's confronted by a thug, you don't have to go along with what that thug says. That's a choice that you could, or you don't. And if there's people on that in your social group, or in your surroundings, that should try to recruit you in to do bad things, think of a junior high school or a high school.
Hey, knowing's half the battle.
Yeah, well, but we all had a choice, right? And some of us chose to go to become, do things that they knew they weren't supposed to be doing, and others didn't. And I think I'm just using it as an analogy, because the reality is that we do have that choice. And so I'm trying to give the idea here is that we do have that empowerment. That's the reality. And so if you're hearing this, I hope you won't be too weirded out by the top hat man, because ultimately there is a choice. It's now
it's over.
Hour and 15 minutes in. Going to go ahead and wrap it up. I just want to give a quick plug for myself, of course. If you're interested in the book, in my book, Tyson's Gift, you can find it at tysonsgift.com. If you're interested in the healing offerings that I have, you can go to tysonsgifthealing.com. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Will, thank you so much.
Thank you, B,
for coming on. It's been awesome, and we've occupied probably more like two and a half hours now talking about this subject, but it's fascinating, and I appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing that. I mean, because that's a very sensitive story, and I'm sure it's, and knowing that there's a bunch of people out there that you don't know that are hearing this story. I appreciate your candor.
Yeah, don't hold it against me later. Thank you guys so much.
I'll leave that to somebody else. And Rachel says, thank you so much, Will, for sharing. Thank you, Brandon. Of course, Rachel, thanks for tuning in. I'm glad you're here. Courtney says, thanks, guys. Good night. And Rachel says, hugs. So yes, thanks everybody. And we will see you next week. I'm going to make an announcement of it. There is a show next Thursday, though. It's a energy healer that I'm going to have on that's got a very unique modality. So that will be excellent. And 6 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. See you next week.
Thanks.
The truth is here and now on WLTK-DB Talk Radio at WLTK-DB.com.